The Conjuring is a horror movie that was so successful that a little doll who made 2 very small but very effective appearances actually got its own movie in the form of Annabelle. It served as a prequel to The Conjuring, however, it was not received well by either audiences or critics. But what do you expect when you hire the director of Mortal Kombat Annihilation? Now, new-time director David Sandberg, who just last year had directed his first movie, Lights Out, is helming the sequel, which is actually a prequel to the prequel. Yeah. So, did the sequel improve over the failings of its predecessor, or did it succumb to the same horrific mistakes? Well, in this versus video, we are gonna find out. Let the battle commence. Now, the story for the first Annabelle is that this couple moves into a new house, and as a moving gift, the husband buys his wife a doll that she apparently has been searching for a very long time. That very same night, their next door neighbors are killed by a woman named Annabelle Higgins and her boyfriend, who are a part of a horrific cult. Almost immediately after, they try to kill our 2 main characters, but quite embarrassingly, they both fail, and rather than being arrested, Annabelle slits her own throat, spilling all her blood on the doll. And from this point on, we have our haunted doll movie. Now, the story for Annabelle Creation is that a doll maker and his wife witness their daughter get run over by a truck and die. 12 years later, we see some orphan girls and a nun move into the doll maker's house, and it's at this point where some of the girls start noticing strange sightings and supernatural occurrences. And that's it for the story of Annabelle 2. Now, there's more to it than that, but I'm not going to talk about it as that just delves into spoiler territory. And if you want the movie spoiled for you, then just watch the second trailer. Now, Annabelle Creation is a prequel to the first Annabelle, and in my opinion, it bridges the gap very well. Right away, you'll notice that the movie feels very different from the first, and it comes across as a much more atmospheric and skillfully put together project, rather than a cheap and inexperienced one. So right off the bat, Annabelle 2 has you invested far more than the first one with regards to its storytelling. And as a result, the movie with the best story is Annabelle 2. Our main characters for the first Annabelle are these 2 nobodies, and usually I don't mind new actors if they are good, but the problem is, these 2 are not good. In fact, they are pretty terrible. The first thing that becomes painfully apparent is that their line delivery is so dull and their expressions are unbelievably lifeless. They come off more as models that are acting for the first time in their lives rather than professional actors. For example, in the first 2 scenes, the movie tries to humanize them by having them discuss their future once their baby is born, but their performance completely lacks any genuine emotion, and as a result, you can't feel for them at all. And what elevates these scenes from being just bad to so painstakingly annoying is that the movie feels like it's under the delusion that it's giving us some genuinely charming and deep character moments when in actuality, it's sadly mistaken. And to be fair, the actors are not the only ones to blame here. It's also the directing. From a filming perspective, it incorporates such basic mistakes that even an amateur filmmaker like myself would notice during the filming process, such as keeping the box in focus instead of the doll when it's being lifted out, and not even telling your bloody actors to at least pretend to look tired when they wake up in the middle of the night. And this happens quite a few times throughout the movie, and every single time they look like they were never asleep in the first place. And it's inconsistencies like this that really take you out of the movie, and it's a testament and perfect example as to why details do matter. But what makes this especially infuriating to me is that these are mistakes that even I don't make, and I have a lot more leeway in my productions as I'm just making YouTube videos. When you're making a multi-million-dollar movie that you're going to charge people to see, then there is no excuse to let simple mistakes like these pass by. Now, to her very little credit, even though the director clearly isn't directing, the wife, played by Annabelle Wallis, is trying at times. But the husband, played by Ward Horton, isn't trying at all. Just look at the face he makes when he hears the distressed screams of his wife and child. Not to mention that the extent of his dramatic acting ability is all down to how wide he can open his eyes. I mean, seriously, either this guy can't act, or he just didn't give a shit about this movie. In which case, I almost respect him for that. But in all seriousness, he needs to try much harder than this because this is pretty embarrassing. The only good actor in this movie is Alfre Woodard, and yes, long-time viewers on my show will know that I have a controversial critical history with this actress. If you have watched my Limney Snicket's Versus video, you will know that I absolutely trashed on her acting ability. But many of you told me that she is actually a good actress outside of Snicket's, and I'll admit, it turns out that she can turn in a decent performance. Even amongst the bland direction and poor delivery from the rest of these actors, she stands out and is far better than all of them. What my question is what is she even doing in this movie? As a matter of fact, a bigger question is, why isn't she playing the wife in this film instead of supermodel here? Clearly the director needed help in assigning roles to his actors, something the director of Annabelle 2 had absolutely no problem with at all. The most interesting thing about the characters in Annabelle 2 is that they are all played by kids, and it's a lot more challenging to find good kid actors that can carry the majority of a movie on their own, but these kids do a really good job. They all feel distinct, have their own personalities, and they encapsulate all the realistic characteristics of kids their age. There was one scene in particular at the beginning of the movie where one of the girls shows sympathy towards the one that was crippled, and it was so genuine, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but it was downright adorable. So props to the director David Sandberg for picking out these kids, as they all did a great job. There were a few moments where I thought, would kids this young really say something that mature? But for the most part, they do talk, react, and emote appropriately for their age demographic. And as for the very few adults in this movie, they were all perfectly fine. These are clearly actors that know what they are doing, and I had absolutely no problems with them at all. Now, judging by my analysis, you will probably have already come to the conclusion that the second Annabelle movie has the better characters, but I'm not done with the first movie just yet. In fact, I'm not sure if you guys noticed, but the characters in the first Annabelle would come off as very odd and unnatural at times.
And I can't stand your grandmother.
Oh dear.
I mean, it's not only me. I mean, nobody can stand her.
No, she's right. Everyone hates her.
Okay, well, on that note...
Is this supposed to be a charming conversation with the neighbors? Talking shit about your husband's grandmother? If they're meant to be joking, I can't even tell. The delivery of these lines is so awkward and dull that it just seems like they are being assholes.
Oh, you didn't lock it?
No, why would I?
What was the point of this scene? It didn't benefit the movie, and if anything, it just shows us how irresponsible and stupid this guy is. And after the crazy nuts break into the house and Mia returns from the hospital, look what happens.
The lock.
That's right. After everything that's happened, the moron still doesn't lock the bloody door.
It's gonna be okay. You are gonna be fine.
I wouldn't bet money on it, Nimrod. I will admit though, the movie did have one good joke.
Oh, you know what? There's something I want to give you.
Oh no, the last time you said that, I ended up pregnant.
Yes, you did.
That was the best delivered line throughout this whole movie, but it doesn't make up for the rest of the poor dialogue. So yeah, without a doubt, the movie with the better characters and all-round better actors is Annabelle 2. Annabelle's introduction in the first movie is more of an excuse than anything else. As I stated earlier, unbelievably, the wife was actively searching for this doll, and her husband just so happened to find it for her and gives it to her as a moving-in present. But then, after the kooks break in, she says that she wants to get rid of it because the crazy lady was holding her. Although more importantly, she leaves out the part where she was bleeding all over the thing. So regardless, he does just that. But then when they move again, the doll is mysteriously packed with their stuff. The husband says that he will get rid of it, but she says no, and suddenly decides that she wants to keep it. Just let me put it right here in my baby's room, even though this murderous psychopath was bleeding all over it. And these are basically our introduction scenes to Annabelle, and oddly enough, it's portrayed in a whimsical way. Now if the intent was to make this scene come off as disturbing and unnatural, then the movie completely failed, because it just comes off as an excuse for the characters to keep the doll. So yeah, Annabelle's introduction in the first movie was as boring and disappointing as could be. As for Annabelle's introduction in the second movie, it was handled absolutely perfectly. Instead of being portrayed in a whimsical fashion, the film openly acknowledges that this is a creepy-ass doll, and it perfectly illustrates that with a combination of lighting, shadows, and cinematography. And I really have to commend the movie for making Annabelle look genuinely scary again. Now with regards to the first Annabelle's tone, the overall atmosphere of the movie is just boring. I don't care for the characters, and as a result, I can't get invested in their performances, and consequentially, that damages any morsel of sympathy I have for them. It also affects the horror element, as I don't truly believe that these characters are genuinely scared out of their minds. I can always tell that they're acting. Add to that the craftless editing and directing, and you have a very paint-by-numbers horror movie. The scares are just standard and lack any passionate creativity. Now the movie does have some really smart setups and some ingeniously well-staged shots and cinematography, but unfortunately that's where the creativity ends. Instead of having a great and horrifying payoff to go with the creative setups, the scare is always either underwhelming or just lacks the proper punch. There was only 2 scares in this movie that I liked. One took me by surprise, and the other was well shot and edited. And then you have other scenes such as the build-up with the sewing machine. Again, the idea was good, but the payoff was very weak, and more down to mere stupidity rather than supernatural circumstances. I mean, Annabelle is looking at the wife thinking, I am planning something in the kitchen here. I had nothing to do with cutting your finger or tripping you over. That's all on you. Even when the movie is trying to imitate previous James Wan films such as the door slams, they sound so flat and lack the harsh impact to your ears that James Wan's movies had. On a more positive note, I did really like how Annabelle looks kind of normal at first, but then as the movie goes on, she starts to look more rotten, demented, and possessed. But that's about all the praise I can give her in the first movie. The rest of the scares are poorly handled, lack the punch of unassuming horror, and ultimately leave you recreating a much scarier version of the scene in your own head. Not exactly a reaction that you want when watching a horror movie. As for Annabelle 2, the scares were much more effective and focused. The first place this becomes apparent is in the tension that constantly builds up to each scare. It's genuinely startling and keeps you on the edge of your seat. And it really plays with your expectations by making you think one thing is going to happen, but then without warning something completely unexpected happens. And much like other really effective horror movies, it incorporates abstract imagery in the background, and this ingeniously adds an extra layer to the horror as you're constantly scanning the scene for things that might pop up out of nowhere. You will also notice that the director David Sandberg included some of the scares from his horror shorts, which worked as both a nice reference and logical scare that fits within the Conjuring universe. Even the sound design was top-notch and very effective. The whole production is just so much more artistic and is much more interesting to watch from both an entertainment and filmmaking perspective. You know, as opposed to the first movie. Now, it's not all perfect. As a matter of fact, I do have quite a few problems with Annabelle 2. First off, some of the scares did not pay off incredibly well. They ended too early and weren't fully realized, such as the ingenious setup with the scarecrow and the unbelievably quick and anticlimactic ending, just to name a few. And when you apply any sense of logic, you can really pick this movie apart. Also, I really think the movie would have benefited by killing some of the kids off. I'm starting to notice a trend in these horror movies where the main characters come out unscathed, and it didn't bother me in the first few films, but it's really starting to stand out now, and these movies seriously need to include more casualties, as you can too easily predict who's going to survive in the end. Also, when a scary scene is underway and the victim starts screaming for help, all the people within close range from them for some reason cannot hear their screams. This didn't bother me at first, but it was dangerously overused and became way too convenient after the movie did it for the umpteenth time. So it really depends on your tolerance level. If all you really care about is experiencing the scares, then this won't bother you as much. But if, like me, you want the movie to stick to its established logic during its scary moments, then this will impact your overall opinion of the movie. So, the movie with the far more effective horror is Annabelle 2. Ultimately, the problem with the scares in Annabelle 1 is that despite having plenty of bad ones, some of the good ones just need simple revisements, and that would make them far more effective. But when I am constantly watching the horror scenes and recreating them much more effectively in my head, then you've lost me. You have failed as a scary movie, because instead of taking me by surprise, I am left wandering around in my own head thinking of ways to scare myself, rather than being scared of the movie that is playing right in front of me. The movie constantly tries to focus on Annabelle to give you the impression that something is not right with this doll, much like what Child's Play did with Chucky. The only difference being is that with Chucky, the camera work really made you feel like something was unnatural and off, whereas with Annabelle, all you feel is happening is that you are looking at a lifeless prop and that's it. There is no tension around it, and calling it half-arsed would be an understatement. There really is an abnormal lack of craft when it comes to this film. I kid you not, a much better Annabelle movie is the 2 scenes she gets in The Conjuring. She does so much more in those 2 scenes than she does in this entire movie. Annabelle 2, on the other hand, is a far more competent film. It gave us a setup, and it naturally incorporated its characters into an unfortunate situation. It takes full advantage of its environments and incorporates the scares very effectively. For instance, Annabelle actually moves and does stuff, whereas she did absolutely nothing in the first movie. Although, the whole rule about Annabelle not being able to visibly move does bother me, because in The Conjuring, we clearly see her turn her head all by herself. So where this no move rule came from for her solo movies, I will never know. Also, the demon is much scarier and intimidating in Annabelle 2. It actually fatally harms people and even kills them, whereas the most we see it do in the first movie is lift up the doll and grab someone's wrist. Bloody riveting. It's time for the scores, and my score for the first Annabelle has remained the same after all these years. Observe, Annabelle 1 gets a 2 out of 10, and Annabelle Creation gets a 7. Annabelle 2 was clearly made with passion and effort, whereas Part 1 was just made as a cash grab to quickly bank on the success of The Conjuring. And it's lazy corporate cash grabs like this that force my hand and make me drop the movie score all the way down. So, what did you guys think of Annabelle 1 and 2? Did you agree or disagree with my comparison? Comment below with your thoughts, as I would love to hear them. And that's it for another Versus video. If you guys liked it, please give it a thumbs up and also share it so more people can be aware of the show. As always, thank you very much for watching, guys, and I'll catch all of you next time. Take care.